So first of all, thank you organizers, Josh, Dan, Olivia, Alex, and maybe others for inviting me to such a beautiful location. And it's not good morning, but good evening to me. So it's past midnight, 30 minutes past midnight in Japan time. So I try to be awake. Okay, so today I'll talk about the dispersal evolution, my theoretical work. That was in collaboration with Kare Parvinen from University of Turku and Joe Yuichiro Wakano at Meiji. So that's my self-introduction, and I'm from Sokendai. Sokendai is an abbreviation of some Japanese name, so it has no English meaning. But Sokendai, Hayama, Japan. And Hayama is about 1 hour by train or 1 hour by car from the central Tokyo. So I would say that it's a greater Tokyo, but actually there are some hills and forests. It's not a Tokyo-like place. And I'm from that university, actually a graduate university. I'm a theoretical biologist, and I'm interested in so many things, but my main topic theme is social evolution, and also the human evolution, including cultural evolution or human life history. And today I will talk about evolution of dispersal, so more ecology-related topic from the perspective of evolutionary game theory. So dispersal is everywhere. So the dandelion, so they disperse their seeds. And maybe the second one, the left bottom one, I think some Japanese audience are familiar with this kind of the seed. So it's really sticky. It has a lot of small thorns. When I was a child, I played with throwing those. And that is really sticky. Once it sticks to my sweater, for example, it's very hard to detach it. So these thorns are the evolutionary adaptations because with those thorns, the plant seeds can be carried by animals like me. Okay, and many animals also disperse. For example, sparrows, those birds are dispersed, and the gorillas, they are the male dispersers. So usually females remain in the natal site, but those the male gorillas, and in many primate species, male disperse more than the females. So the dispersal is everywhere. But then we want to understand what causes the evolution of dispersal of plants and animals and whatever. So there are so many factors that disfavor and favor dispersal. So I just list a few here. For example, if there's a cost of dispersal, then by that the dispersal is disfavored. For example, there is some energetic cost or metabolic cost to make some the body organs for the flying, and also there is quite a high mortality risk. And even if you disperse, you may not find a good destination. Then you will die. So it's a survival. The dispersal is risky. Or if you disperse and if you are conspecific, if you are the family members disperse, then you cannot make the strong cooperation by kin. So there is a side effect of dispersal, and that kind of failure of kin cooperation will disfavor dispersal. And there are other factors that favor dispersal. For example, the inbreeding avoidance is one of the major drivers of the evolution of dispersal. Or if there's some local catastrophe and there's some, for example, the environmental the catastrophe, then it may be adaptive that you escape from the natal site because you may experience the local disaster, and rather you should go away to avoid this kind of local disaster. Or the local kin competition is also important. If you stick to your natal site, then you compete the resource. You compete over resource with your kin, and that is detrimental. Some interesting, some minor but interesting factor also exists, such as cyclical dynamics, like this slide shows. So suppose that patch A is crowded, and now the density is really high, so that is showing in red, and the blue patch is quite low density. Then maybe those in the high density patch think, okay, let's get away from this high density patch to get a relaxed low density patch. But if there's some kind of overcompensation, and if everyone goes to another site, then that another site becomes a high density patch. And maybe they will think about, okay, let's go back to the original site, because now the original site is low density. So this is also a factor that favors dispersal. So there are so many factors promoting or inhibiting dispersal. So the one seminal work is by Hamilton and May in 1977, and they made a very, very simple but quite insightful model to study the evolution of dispersal. So in their model, they assumed that each patch can foster only a single adult. Okay, so there's intense competition, and at the end, only one individual becomes adult in the patch, and all the others will die out. And there are so many patches of this type. Okay, so theoretically speaking, infinitely many patches that each can foster a single adult. And P is a parameter that measures the survival probability of dispersal. So if you decide to disperse your offspring, then each offspring survives with probability P. Okay, so if P is small, then there's a much risk in dispersal. Then under that simple model, they calculated the evolutionarily stable dispersal rate, which is 1/2 minus P. And the astonishing aspect of this formula is that if P is very close to 0, then that means that the dispersal is nearly fatal. But still, if you put P equals 0 in that formula, then you will find that M star is 1/2. So even if the dispersal is nearly fatal, it is adaptive to disperse half of your offspring. So that's quite unintuitive but interesting theoretical result. And there are lots of the dispersal models, but many traditional models assume that the patches are the same in quality, for example. So they are same in quality, and they have the equal size, and they have the equal attractiveness. Okay. But the point and the question I want to raise today is the fact that habitats are usually often heterogeneous in our environment. Then we want to know what's the effect of the environmental heterogeneous the habitat on evolution of dispersal. So for example, there are lots of colored the patches, but those each circle represents patches, but they differ in many aspects. For example, their sizes can be different, or their qualities can be different, so that the resource abundance can be different, or even some attractiveness of the patches are different for some reason. Maybe there's a good smell, or they look great, or they look better than so for some reason there may be some difference in patch attractiveness. So we want to study the effect of those patch heterogeneity on the evolution of dispersal, and especially whether those heterogeneity in patch quality or patch character favors or disfavors dispersal. Okay, so here is the mathematical model to study this kind of question. So for that purpose, we want to introduce heterogeneity in patch character. So I is the patch type labeling. So the assumption is that there are so many patches, theoretically speaking, infinitely many patches, but those patches are different in quality. And there are actually the capital N types of different patches in the population. So they differ, for example, in the quality. And fecundity F characterizes the quality. So by fecundity F, I mean that the adult in that patch can produce F many offspring. So if F is large, then you can produce many offsprings. possibly because the resource is quite abundant in the patch. And also the size matter. The size is the capacity, carrying capacity for the adult. So in Hamilton main model, it was 1, but I want to generalize the idea. And also the patch attractiveness can be different between patches. And attractiveness is represented by the parameter lambda. So at least those 3 the components are studied in my talk. And pi I represents the patch proportion because there are n types in the population. Okay. So here's the specific life cycle. So the evolutionary trait is a dispersal rate, and you have a dispersal rate, okay, M. So first, each adult produces many juveniles, and that is proportional to F, the fecundity or the quality of the patch. And then those juveniles disperse according to the migration probability M. So with probability M, those the juveniles independently disperse to somewhere, okay? And 1 minus M, the rest, 1 minus M remains in the natal patch. And in dispersal, there's a survival probability P, okay? So there's a risk of survival. There's a risk of dispersal. And each dispersing juveniles arrives at a type I patch proportional to the fraction of the patch pi I times the lambda factor. Lambda is attractiveness. So lambda is a factor that represents how attractive each patch is. Okay? Then in each patch, there's a competition, and only Ni juvenile survives and become an adult, and the life cycle continues. So now M is an evolutionary trait. And for genetics, I assume the simplest one, haploid, and asexual the individuals. And actually, there's a benchmark result for the single patch type case. And now N is generalized and extended from Hamilton main model. And the formula looks like this. Okay, but that looks very complicated. And this is a benchmark result because this is a result for the homogeneous population. And then let's try to introduce heterogeneity into the model, and let's see what happens. And here's the result. So the graph shows a lot of curves, but the top one is the benchmark result, where there's no heterogeneity in patch quality. F1 and F2, those are the fecundity in type 1 patch and type 2 patch. So if F1 divided by F2 is equal to 1, then there's no heterogeneity at all. Okay? And if you increase the heterogeneity, then the curve goes down. Actually, the y-axis is the singular dispersal the rate. So that the fact that the curve goes down means that less dispersal probability is favored by natural selection. And the x-axis is actually the proportion of patch type 1. Now I assume only 2 patches, 2 types in the population. So if it's in the center, 0.5, then there's a mixture of 50% of type 1 patch and 50% of type 2 patch. Okay, so now you see in the middle, the evolved dispersal rate is the smallest. So that shows that the heterogeneity, environmental heterogeneity, suppresses the evolution of dispersal. So what about the patch size? Now everything is controlled and everything is the same except the patch size. Now N1 is 4, but I change N2 value, the size of the type 2 patch. And again, I see the decline of the evolved dispersal rate. So the heterogeneity in this case also disfavors evolution of dispersal. And a similar result holds for the heterogeneous patch attractiveness. And now I choose the parameter such that N's and F's are the same, but the patch attractivities are different between patches. And now, once again, we see the decline of the evolved dispersal rate. Okay? But why? We want to know the intuition. That's the most important part. And without the intuition, it's just a list of mathematical results. Okay, so in our mathematical proof, we found this value V is quite important. And actually, the variance of the population variance of V is the most important factor. What is V? Okay, the the numerator is n times f. So that is the productivity of the patch. And the lambda, the denominator, is the attractiveness. So if it is less attractive, then the value of V is larger. So that means that if lambda is small, then the patch reproductive potential V is large. And what's happening here is that because if V is very large, then your patch is really productive and that your patch receives less immigrant. So it is a better patch, okay, better patch. And you do not want to go out from the better patch because you are already in a better patch, okay? So if V is large, then you favor less dispersal. But if V is small, then your patch is less productive and receives so many migrants, really competitive. So you want to go away, okay? You want to escape. So if you are in a low V patch, you want to escape from that. Then what's the outcome? Well, actually, high V patches are the evolutionary sources. So it, outputs many the migrants to the population. And low V patches receives a lot of migrants. So it is an evolutionary sink. And what is important is the selection, natural selection in source patches rather than sink patches, because source patches produces so many offspring, and those offspring contribute to the future gene, okay? So what is important is what is happening in high V patches. And in high V patches, less dispersal is favored. So as a result, as a balance between the high V patch and low V patch, but high V patch are more important, then this favors less dispersal, okay? And also the heterogeneity induces the branching effect. The disruptive selection means the selective force that leads to branching of the evolutionary trait. And there's a benchmark result that if there is no heterogeneity, no branching. So that's the previous result. But we found that with population heterogeneity, the branching happens quite often, especially when the N is differed. This purple part of the graph shows there is a branching in this parameter region. Okay, so let's make a summary. So we have studied the impact of heterogeneity on the evolution of dispersal. And we found that the spatial heterogeneity favors less dispersal. And for the disruptive selection, we found that the heterogeneity favors disruptive selection, especially when the patch sizes are not patch types. Okay, so what's the biological implications? The real world is highly heterogeneous in the environment, and our work suggests that compared with the traditional viewpoint, I think more attention should be paid to the effect of environmental heterogeneity, because this favors less. This favors dispersal. Okay, so that's a reference, and thank you very much for your listening.